a series on sexual ethics. But before we start, here is the funniest thing we saw on the internet this week.
I was an English major when I was in college, and being an English major doesn't make you a comedian, but it does make you less hireable. So your schedule really opens up for you to pursue your dreams, you know? I'm not distracted by salary or benefits. Unstoppable.
Welcome to Eastlake Online. This is a condensed version of what we do live every Sunday
job
at that
interview
time
process was with a
We know it's not
pyramid
always
scheme
possible or even preferred to be a part of what we do in person.
100%
So
true. In the interview,
that's why
I
we made
realized
this.
halfway through the interview,
Thanks for
they were
checking
just
it out.
Michael,
In just a
if
minute,
we
someone is
hired
going to give a
in
short
10 to
talk
12 months,
that hopefully
you could be
resonates with
owning and
you,
running your own
and helps
company.
you interpret what it might mean
Does
to
that
follow
scare
in the
you?
way of Jesus, because that's what this community is all about.
But
Figuring
it
out
should scare
what it
you.
might look like to live life the way that Jesus did, except
I was an English major.
self-earnings and
The
self-driving
only thing I
cars.
know about
We're a
capitalism is if I
community
see
where
a
everyone is
period, the
invited,
next letter
included,
should be
and
bigger.
involved, no matter what. And though our physical location is in the budding metropolis of the Tri-Cities, wherever you're watching this from, we want to invite you to bring a bit of heaven into your part of the world. Thanks for catching us on the interwebs. If you're looking for more content, follow us on social media or keep checking our website for all kinds of resources that we hope are helpful. Now, this.
Well, good morning and welcome to Eastlake. Welcome to those of you who are watching online or more likely on replay. It is, after all, the 4th of July. Church on an actual national holiday. It doesn't happen all that often because most national holidays are the first Monday after or whatever, and so we get to avoid. It doesn't really affect us all that much, except when something like this happens. So we are glad that you're here. We are talking about fireworks of a different sort today. It's a series on sex, and you're like, I came to church on 4th of July. It should be about freedom or Declaration of Independence or something like that. Sort of. It's a series on sexual ethics. We're calling it about that. We kicked it off a couple of weeks ago. And basically, the idea being this, that when you look at sort of the New Testament, which is the right side of your Bible, there's 27 books that make up that. 13 of them are written, or about 13 are written by a guy named Paul. And he was a guy who planted a bunch of churches in sort of kind of different. He went from the east, from Israel, and into sort of the Western Mediterranean, all the way to Rome. Was hoping to get to Spain, wouldn't actually eventually get there. But outside of its Jewish context, taking this message of a Jewish Messiah into kind of this Greek culture that had all kinds of different systems and religious systems, would start churches there, would be there in its infancy, get it up and going, and then would leave to go start another one, but then would operate as kind of an external advisor, writing back and forth letters of correspondence, offering advice or thoughts, or here's what you should do in current situations. And some of those letters were then collected by the church over time, saying that these are valuable not just for us, but perhaps other people. And eventually that collection would make its way into what became known as Te Biblia, or the Bible, in a way. So, and in his writings, and many of Paul's writings to a lot of these different church communities, they'd be filled with thoughts and concerns, words of inspiration, exhortation, and almost in every single one of the ones that were addressed specifically to churches, not necessarily individuals, he did that a couple times, but when it came to church communities, in almost all of them, some sort of prescriptive language about sexual ethics, which is not surprising. He's again, writing to a Greek culture that oftentimes was a lot more sexually expressive or free, like a lot more sexual freedoms than the culture that he was probably coming from. A Jewish culture that had in its background, like this idea of the 10 Commandments of the Torah and all of these different sort of disciplined in life, and Yahweh God has this for you, and then all the God. A God in a government that is operated very theocratically, meaning like God had insights and was personally involved with the people of Israel. They thought that they were the chosen people of God. And he's going into Greek culture where for them, the gods existed, but they were too busy doing their other things. They didn't really care about what we do with our life. What we do with our life is just what makes sense for us and what fits culturally and politically, and how do we live amongst each other and not want to kill each other and all of that. And so they did not live with a high level of accountability to the gods all that much. It was completely different. So Paul knows he's writing to these people, and he's trying to address some issues to them. And when it comes to sexuality, he brings it up over and over again in his letters. It would be remiss to kind of read through some of these things and not think that this is sort of a big deal to Paul. Like he's saying this is a big deal, either one, in the way in which it means to live in the way of Jesus, or two, this just seems to be a recurring issue in cultures where this kind of thing was kind of rampant in this idea of unaccountability to some sort of a divine being. When it takes its expression in personal sexuality, there's a lot of issues. And so maybe perhaps a lot of these churches are writing back to him going, hey, we're having some problems here. Like, does this sound right? Like, this is what's going on, but it seems like maybe that this isn't what we're supposed to be doing in this way. So he brings it up and over and over and over again. And I think one of the reasons that Christianity survived and thrived in these outposts of religious nature in cultures that were typically non-religious was because of its high view of sexuality, and was because of its high view of both marriage and commitment and fidelity within the construct of marriage, and procreation and all of these sort of home stability things that would be a positive step in the right direction, especially in the area of gender equality, right? He's writing these people in cultures where typically the men would have a lot more sexual freedoms than the women, and Paul is writing to call them back towards sexual fidelity to their spouses. I'm sure these spouses are going, this is good. You should really listen to this, honey. You should read this. This is what Paul's saying. This is a big deal for a lot of them, and I think it's one of the reasons that Christianity succeeded in this way. People are quick to point out in today's day and age that the divorce rate amongst church people or people who identify as Christians is just as high, if not higher, than people who identify as irreligious. But something that is true now doesn't necessarily mean that it's always been true. I really do think that one of the reasons Christianity survived is because of its high view of sexuality and all of the things that go along with that. So we are going to take a few weeks and look at sexual ethics and what it means and what Paul wrote about it, and perhaps what might transfer over into the way that you live and live out your feelings about sexual ethics, because we all have them. It's just, where do we stand on this? So last week we said this. Sex has a way of uniting us to each other, that there is a purpose and an intentionality to sex, and the intentionality and the purpose of it is to unite two things together. Or, like we said in last week, the image or metaphor was sex is like welding, is what I think Paul would say to us. And if you knew what welding was and with us, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that. When you want to join two things together permanently, and where breaking them apart would be really, really difficult, then sex is a great tool for doing that. Welding makes sense when it comes to water pipes, less so when it comes to tent poles, right? Tent poles are meant to be, set up and torn down. The water pipes in your house, if they were zip tied together, that would be a fault thing. So that would be something that's not good, that needs to be addressed in your home. I say all of that. I wanted to recap that because I am going to draw some of that into a little bit of today's talk. And also, last week's recording didn't work, right? Our camera just farted, and it just was done. And that's a technical term. I don't expect you to know what that means. But it never showed up. And so I wanted to address that because I didn't want you to think I said something inappropriate and we scrubbed it from the internet, okay? That, as far as I know, is not true. I was told by our technical team, sorry, it didn't work. The live stream didn't work. So for those of you who tried to watch last week and it didn't work, thanks for coming back and giving us another shot. So today is part 3 of 4 of this series. You can go back and listen to part 1. Part 2 is this like NFT. Like nobody, if you were here, you got it, but everybody else, you just have to remember it from memory or talk to somebody who's here. Anyways, all right. Today I want to talk about the idea of acclamation. Acclamation, all right? A fancy word, not really all that fancy, but acclamation is why your out-of-town friends text you or texted you this week and say, I don't know how you live there with all of that heat, right? Acclamation is me yesterday with my kids outside in our yard, and I'm sitting there, and I look at my wife and I go, it doesn't feel that bad today. And she pulls out her phone and shows me 100 degrees. And I'm like, it feels balmy. It feels fine. I don't know. When you've had 115, 100 doesn't feel all that bad, right? That's how acclamation, well, yeah, it'd be like, no, it feels awful still, dude. Acclamation is why your coworkers don't seem like the jerks they were when you first started, right? When you first started, everybody's a jerk. And now, maybe they've gotten better or you've become more jerky, and so now you're like stand out less. That could be it too, right? So You've acclimated to the work environment in this way. Acclimation is why you don't think your house smells like your cat's, and I say cats plural because that's always involved in that, and it does. You become acclimated to it, right? Acclimation is why Starbucks increases their prices by like a couple nickels every 9 months instead of all at once, because if they did it all at once, you would rage tweet about the price of your caramel macchiato, but instead, you just kind of take it, and you're like, well, it's cost of doing business, right? And all of a sudden, you're paying $9 for a drink, and you're like, what's going on? How does this work? And it doesn't stop you from buying it, but you're not happy when you do it, right? That's how it works. When you do acclimation correctly, it's kind of happens slowly, and you become, I want to get there, but I can't just go cold turkey there. I've got to acclimate myself to be able to do this. Acclimation occurs in various arenas of life, even in our behavioral standards, which is the spot that I'm going to get to with this today. When we want our behavioral standards to shift, a lot of times acclimation has a part in this, based on sometimes our surroundings or perhaps who we choose to surround ourselves with. If you think back to the first time that you moved out of your parents' house and you moved out on your own, whether it was you went to college or moved into an apartment or moved into somebody or something like that, all of a sudden you begin to kind of experience the increasing freedoms that comes with acclimation to this new way of life. I can watch whatever I want. I can stay up as late as I want. I can put in my fridge whatever I want. Like, this is a new acclimating way of life. But it's not always just about expanding freedoms as well. It works the other way too. There can be dwindling or diminishing freedoms. During the honeymoon phase of any relationship, acclimation shows up in the form of dwindling freedoms, right? Because she moves in, and all of a sudden, you're there, and you think it's fine, and there's like this awkwardness, and there's this silence, and something's wrong, but you can't exactly tell what it is, and you're like, is everything okay, babe? What's going on? And she says something along the lines of, you're not actually thinking about leaving those socks right there, are you? And you find yourself saying, to be honest, I wasn't thinking about that at all, right? I mean, either way, it's actually mind-boggling that you might think I was thinking about sock placement. That's what I can't wrap my mind around the most, is that I don't understand what this has happened, right? When two lives become more intertwined, acclimation is always inevitable. We are always in the process of acclimating towards something. When you make a life decision for the betterment of your health, when you decide, you know what, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to move more, I'm going to get more and better sleep or whatever, it's oftentimes an issue of acclimation. I want that, but I know I can't do that right now. So what I'll do is I'll slowly begin to make the right decisions that kind of get me in that direction, slowly and surely moving in the right direction. With operational grace, which is a key part, during those times when two steps forward results in kind of one step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. But at least I'm moving in the right direction. At least I'm acclimating to the spot that I want to be at. That is what shows up in one of the books that we're going to be talking about today. That right there is representative of one of the early churches that Paul begins to write to. In fact, probably the first letter the oldest letter that we have, one of the first ones that he wrote to a church. The location was called Thessalonica. It's a book that's called Thessalonians, and there's 2 parts to it because there's 2 letters that they kept for us, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And it shows up in a major section, and it's penned to a group of people who are, again, new converts currently undergoing acclimation to this new way of life. A way of life pattern after doing life in the way of Jesus, right? So he's going, listen, there was this Jewish carpenter / Messiah. We believe that he was divine, a divine being. We believe in the teachings of what he did. We believe that his death, burial, and resurrection affirms that what he said was true. He had this big, giant ethic or creed that says, you love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and then love others as yourself. Those were his 2 big things, and we are just trying to figure out what it would mean and what it would look like to live and to pattern our lives in that way. So he writes to these people, and he's saying, if you're going to live in that way, it's going to require some sort of an acclimation from what you're used to what you're currently being called to. Again, these are primarily Gentile converts, not Jewish. Thus, the cultural backdrop of moralistic standards was different than in some of what we see in, say, the book of Acts, where Acts is a bunch of Peter, James, John, all those people kind of expanding churches in kind of that normal Israel area with trying to reach out to people who already had some idea of a background of Jewish law or Torah or whatever. This is the same thing when it comes to the reason that we do church. We've said from the beginning, we want to be a church for people who don't typically like church, who come from backgrounds with no church experience. It's different, by the way. If we were going to be a church that is targeted towards other Christians, we would say, come to our church. We do things better. We have better music. We have a better smelling theater. We have better looking speakers. We have all kinds of different things. We have other things that would draw you in, other than the facial hair. Like we have things that would draw you in to be like, this is a better version of it. And what we would say is that's not our target. We're trying to go after people who are like, I know nothing about church. I didn't grow up in it. I didn't have any background. When you say the book of Acts, I'm looking for AXC, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a book on weapons? There's a job book that helps. Is that a chapter that helps me get a job? Because I'm in. That's the target. That's what we like. That's what we want. We want people to feel comfortable regardless of where they're going. So if that's you, then this is a great chapter, and this is a great verse, and this is a great talk to be a part of, because Paul is writing to them going, listen, I know you come from this background with almost no sort of conscience or like framework, moral framework for sexuality. But if you're going to do things in the Jesus way, there's going to be some moralistic behavior changes that are going to need to take place. There's going to be an acclimation period, and we are going to write to you. This letter is being written to them during this acclimation period. Here's where they are. Here's where he wants them to be, and what does he offer in terms of advice or prescriptive kind of language in those parts. So that's where this is at. We're going to pick it up in chapter 4, which is kind of in the middle of this first letter. It's actually kind of towards the end of it. In verse 1, he says this, as for other matters, brothers and sisters, we instructed you how to live in order to please God, as in fact you are living. All of these things that we've done it in such a way to kind of help you get into this idea of pleasing God or living in a way that's accountable to him. Now, we ask you and urge you in the Lord Jesus to do this more and more. This is, by the way, very praise and affirming sort of language. If your favorite boss that you've ever had has kind of leveraged this sort of methodology with you. They want you to do something different. They want you to live up to, work up to a certain standard. But instead of critiquing and criticizing every move that you make, they affirm you. Like it's like the whole like 3 nice things, 1 bad thing. Like pet you, slap you, right? That kind of thing. And because I want you to go somewhere. I want you to do things differently. But I also want you to feel like affirm that you're doing good. Like we're not there yet, but man, I know you're going to get there because you just got it in you, and you've proven that you've done really good up to this point. And I'm pretty sure you can do it. Now it's going to take some work, but you get it. So this is what Paul's doing in this way: full praise and affirmation, in spite of the fact that there's still opportunity for growth, which is sometimes, by the way, the opposite of what perhaps you've experienced in a church setting or from a religious morality figure or whatever, who a lot of times moralism in many of these situations is taught from a place of ego and shame. Shame on you for not being more like me or us or whatever, or you may be better than you were, but you're still not moving fast enough. And from where we're at, from our perspective, it seems like you still have so far to go, especially, by the way, the church has gotten it wrong so many times in the area of sexual ethics. It's been such a difficult thing, and maybe that's been the reason that has kept you out of church and kept you out of this. And even when you showed up today, you're like, and as soon as I said, we're talking about sexual ethics, it was like arms crossed, head down, when's this over? I got to get out of here, it's fireworks time, whatever, all right. That is the opposite from what we see involved in Paul here. He's about to encourage them and incite them into a new standard and a new way of doing ethics, but it's not a shaming. It's not a I wish you were more like me. It is very much a let's look at this and try and walk through the implications of if you really do believe that the best way to do life is to love God and to love others as you love yourself, then that would affect that would change things, right? I mean, it would change some. Look, anyways, all right, here we go. Verse 2. For you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of the Lord Jesus. It is God's will that you should be sanctified. Now, that's a fancy word, sanctified, that we oftentimes see kind of show up in churchy religious language, or you've been to a Pentecostal church once and that was a big sanctification or something like that. But it just means basically, and he's even reaching into their culture and saying in their Greek and Roman kind of world, again, the gods existed, they were out there, they didn't really have anything to do with real life, and they didn't have any expectations for the most part on how you did, and it wasn't moralistic, and I'm not going to try and be a good person so that they'll be pleased. That had nothing to do with it. It had more to do with sacrifice to the religious system, which was really allegiance to the imperial cult anyways. But they would be familiar with sacredness. Like there would be sacred temples that they would go to with sacred baths. It'd be a bath unlike any other bath. When you come here and you get cleansed, it's a different sort of way of doing things. In the same way, we have this idea of something that's sacred. We have a natural respect a lot of times when we would walk into a big cathedral or a church or a mosque or something like that, where we'd be like, this feels like set apart space. It's still square footage, but it's different square footage. He would say this. It is God's will that you should live as set apart and different for a purpose. That's what sanctified means. Set apart and different, not just for different sake, though. Set apart for intentionality, because there's a purpose behind this thing. I want you to do things different, not so that you can leverage your difference against other people and be like, why can't you be different like me? But I want you to be set aside for a purpose. What is that purpose in that way? All right. It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality. And that word that he uses there is called, the Greek word there is porneia, which basically just is a catch-all phrase for a lot of different things. All the bad things that you think of when it comes to sexual immorality, that's involved in this. So he would say any sort of marital infidelity, adultery, prostitution, blah, blah, blah. All of that is caught up in this catch-all phrase of, it would look like this. You would want to flee from this or avoid this in this way. And it is very loosely defined, which has been a cause of controversy because a lot of people like to attach more things into there that other people would be like, well, I don't think that's true, but whatever. Anyways, that's the phrase that he's using there. It's God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality. And then he's going to go on and kind of define this for us, or plays this out a little bit way, or go in the more positive direction, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong or take advantage of a brother or a sister. We're going to break this verse down a few things, and then we're going to walk through some application, and then I'll get you out of here. But here's the breakdown for it. We've just said that you should avoid this catch-all category of sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body. Now, this is important. This is written in a very patriarchal, male-dominated society, and in this kind of context, most of the sexual promiscuity issues are taking place by males in this culture, right? Even in this culture, if you were a wife, there would be some shame involved in sort of sexual infidelity from you. There would be even some public penalties probably imposed or implemented in this way. But men in this culture were oftentimes allowed the freedoms to be like, you should definitely have a wife who is going to raise legitimate kids for you. But if you want to have something on the side, you shouldn't, wink, wink, but we all do. That's what's basically happening. That's the accepted cultural norm for this area. And so when Paul writes to these and he's trying to draw them into this new way of doing things, he's trying to say, that's not going to work. That's not going to be enough, guys. We got to figure this thing out. So this is no doubt addressed specifically towards guys. And another reason that we know that is because one of the words that he uses here, that it gets a little bit churched up in biblical translations because, it happens, but Verse 4, that each of you should learn to control your own body. That word body right there really could mean a couple of different things. One, it could mean body, which is just like your whole self or whatever. It could mean in some translations wife. Really, the ones that are like misogynistic towards women, it means control your own like spouse and whatever, which is kind of weird. But in a lot of translations, when you look at it, it really kind of means vessel. You should control your own. And it's really funny to read this because a lot of times in commentaries are written by old conservative, generally white men who are trying to be creative in trying to avoid saying something about manhood and saying in the appendages. That's what's happening here. That's essential. I'm trying to avoid it as well. I understand we don't have junior high today, so that we welcome junior hires and high schoolers in here. We're so glad that you're here. Paul has something specific to say to dudes about something that dudes have, right? Control your own, that in a way that is holy and honorable. And so here's what he does here. He reaches into a culture and takes what is prized, a virtue that is prized, which in the Greek culture would be honor, right? It's an honor and shame culture. And so anytime that there's honor, this is why, everybody wants to be statues and coins and everything made out of them. And we're going to build giant buildings and dedicate them to so-and-so. And positions of power and authority, honor was a huge deal. And holiness was a big deal a lot of times for a Jewish context. They grew out of this idea in their holy scriptures, and in the Old Testament, you see verses show up all the time. God is saying, be holy as I am holy, be set apart, be sanctified, be intentional. So he's reaching into these two things, and he's trying to say, listen, there is a way in which you should leverage your sexuality in a way that is holy and honorable. And he doesn't then go into specifically 6 steps of what that might look like that all start with R, as much as we would love that, and it's so practical because we love practical stuff. He's just saying there's a way to think about this with wisdom. Listen, you can do this in holy and honorable ways. Contrasting it instead, unlike the passionate lust of the pagans. Now, he uses this word which immediately communicates like this like condemnation or a negative word towards them. But honestly, I don't feel like he really means that in this context. The pagan world simply did not think of sexual promiscuity or indulgence as wrongdoing. To be selfish in this area was normal. To meet your needs in whatever way possible was absolutely normal. Even the wives knew about the things on the side. They just, that's everybody does it. That's the culture. If you grew up in that, that's what you just know. This is how this thing works. Men, again, would not get married until they were about 30 or so. Women would get married at 14 or 15. There would be this massive age discrepancy. Men would not get married because they didn't have the financial wherewithal to be able to support a family until they were probably at age 30. Girls who were 14 and 15, they wanted to get them married before they, begin to explore themselves sexually. And so we've got to combine these two things. This is the culture that they're in. And in that meantime, what happens between 15 and 30 for those guys? Probably a free-for-all, whatever they want. If you've grown up in that sort of thing, then this is not wrong. This would not even be open for critique for them. Any sort of general critique about that's not right, they would be like, what are you talking about? This is totally normal. This is it's normal to be selfish in this area. And he goes into this idea of these passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God, who don't have the knowledge or the awareness of a new ethic that shapes based on our likeness to our Creator, our sexuality. They believe in a God or gods who exist in the far echelons of some universe somewhere that have no expectations on their own life. It's not surprising that for them, they don't live with a moralistic sense of what's right and wrong when it comes to sexuality. What they do doesn't seem to matter. But for you, it does. And I'm not critiquing them. That's what is so important to think about, because the church has spent so much time critiquing and Paul would say, well, who am I to critique people outside the church? It doesn't matter. I'm saying if you're taking on this mantle of I'm going to live in the way of Jesus, then there's something that changes. But for them, for those outside with no accountability, they do what they want to do. It's fine. I understand it. I get it. He's not criticizing or shaming them. He doesn't expect them to live any differently than they currently are. But he does expect something different from these people. You who are trying to live out the Jesus ethic of I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. I'm going to love God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind. I'm going to give him my ultimate devotion. I'm going to subject all of my own personal passions to that passion. And I'm going to treat others with the respect that they are made in the image of God in the same way that I see myself made in the image of God. You are not going to wrong or take advantage of a brother or a sister. Now, there's a possibility that what Paul is addressing here is a specific occurrence within the church community. Perhaps he got a letter from them saying, hey, somebody within the church has had an affair with so-and-so's wife, and we're just not sure how to handle it, or so-and-so's slave, because everything was owned under a household at that time. But, and that's true, that could be the specific thing. Or I think perhaps possibly something bigger is at play. I think what Paul is trying to communicate is to draw them into this, to invite them into something. That what you've seen modeled is that your needs take priority. That whatever you need to do to get your needs met, you go and do it. That others simply exist as a means to an end. Other people are just instruments to achieve a certain level of satisfaction that you want. And that's not going to work anymore. That's not going to fly anymore. Without going into specific details, Paul outlines a way that is holy and honorable. One that operates with a sense of the overall purpose of sex, like we talked about last week, which is why I felt like I needed to readdress it. One that goes, I think one of the ways that is honorable and holy for me to do this is to understand what it's about and what it's for, and to use it in the context that actually makes sense, to use it when welding needs to happen, when two lives do come together in this way, that is a sense of permanence, that is a sense of communicating, we're on a same commitment level in this way, that isn't so dominating, by the way, that we make poor career choices or we destroy homes or families or marriages simply because we cannot help ourselves. You've seen this, you've read about this. You've experienced this. You've had family members who have gone through something like this. They throw away a career, and it's they sell carpet or cars or something, and they make poor decisions sexually, and all of a sudden it begins to affect other arenas of life. And for a long time they're able to kind of disassociate. That's what I do in my private life with this. But then it's like somebody they work for, or work with, or that she works for him, and it just gets messy. And you look at that and you think, how could you? What were you thinking, man? Or they throw away these marriages and families, and all of a sudden the kids split time, and they do this, and it's so difficult, and it's just these difficult situations where you're like, there's so much pain involved in this. And sometimes, guys, after like 40, 50 years of a marriage, all of a sudden, like something happens, and you think to yourself, how is that holy and honorable in this way? And you hear them begin to justify and how this came about and all these things. And it's such a hard deal. Listen, Paul is writing to them saying, one of the things that's so critical is that you do what is honorable and holy with your body. Sex that doesn't wrong or take advantage of another brother or sister. When she thinks it's welding, but you're in it just for the fun of it. When it communicates that you're more into a relationship than you really are, when somebody is simply a means to an end, it just doesn't work. And I heard somebody this week talk about something in a different context, but I think it applies today. To do what is just, not what is justifiable. What does it mean, Paul, when you say to live with your body in a way that is holy and honorable? To do what is just, not what is justifiable. Because I'll tell you this much, we are creative beings, aren't we? We can justify almost any behavior that we want. Well, the reason I did this, and we talk long enough, and we can justify, at least in our minds, if not the people around us. Sometimes the people around us nod and be like, okay, I get that. And they're like, in their minds, they're like, you're crazy. But in our minds, we are able to justify almost any sort of behavior. And instead, Paul would say, let's step back. Let's do what is just, one that doesn't wrong or violate the freedoms of somebody else, or doesn't communicate, this relationship is worth welding together, when really all you're doing is zip tying it together. And this is just an instrument for pleasure. This is an instrument for fun. It's an instrument for this. And it doesn't mean anything. Paul would say that is not loving your neighbor as yourself. You wouldn't sign up for that on your own. No one signs up to be wronged or taken advantage of sexually. Don't do it to other people. And Paul would say this, listen, I get it. I understand you're coming from this culture that doesn't have any sort of respect for this sort of thing. Acclamation is hard, I know. But when you begin to see yourself as made in the image and the likeness of your Creator, and then you begin to look around and see other people in that same likeness, when you begin to take Jesus seriously when he said to love others in the same way that you love yourself, then don't do it to somebody else. And again, please hear this. Please understand this. He is not shaming here. He's not shaming. He is calling and he's inviting. There's a word that shows up in the Greek about this idea of calling, this kaleo, this ringing true. Does this ring true for you? Does this call you into something different? Does this? Have you seen the way that the brokenness of other paths have gone, maybe from your past or from what you've seen? Can you see how that feels like the world is just kind of throwing darts and hoping to hit something? And can you see that you can be more intentional about this in this way? Can I invite you over? Can I not shame you and do this and critique it? Because I get it. You've had no other understanding for ethic. The only other understanding for ethic is what you read about and you see in the movies or see modeled in culture or whatever. And a lot of times you see the brokenness in that, and you're like, do I really want to go that route? I don't know. And he said, what if it looked like in this way? What if it looked like you were holy and honorable in this way? That you begin to see others in the image and the likeness of their Creator, and that you thought about it sexually in those terms with that person. That you begin to understand sex as the purpose for what it's purposely, intentionally designed to be from our Creator, and lived that out in a different way. And acclamation is hard. Paul would say that. I know. 2 steps forward, sometimes 1 step back, but I'm calling to something different. I think that if if the church as a whole would have gotten this right or continued to get, I think at one point it did get this right, which is one of the reasons it succeeded. And I think that, oftentimes we've lost it. We're just one expression of a community of that. But what if we were the type of people who tried to get this right, who tried our best as a small beacon of hope in a dark world that struggles sexually? But what if there was a group of people who said, you know what, no matter what season, because you never are out of the woods when it comes to sexual ethics. I don't care how long you've been married, man. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. I don't care what you've got going for you. I don't care if you're single and just planning on being single forever. You're never out of the woods when it comes to sexual ethics. Don't ever think that you are. There's a calling, there's a purpose, there's an intentionality towards treating others in a way that is actually an expression of love that we are called to. And it shows up in intense format in the arena of sexuality. So may we be the type of people, may we be a community that is doing our best to get it right, or trying our best to do what we think it would look like to love others in the way that God has loved us and that we love ourselves. Let's pray. Father, our prayer is that you would forgive us for those times when that has not been true, when we have taken advantage and wronged other people because bottom line, we're just selfish. Like, we're just selfish creatures, and we know that, and we don't have to live with the overarching guilt forever about that, but you invite us into something, a higher standard of living, a higher calling, a point where there's definitely acclamation to it, but I think that as Paul is trying to encourage these people to see themselves made in the image of God and worthy of that kind of love, and then begin to kind of change the lens by which we look at others as well. So give us the wisdom to know what that looks like in our arena, our current season of life, married, single, divorced, widowed, whatever. Give us the courage to do something about it in your name. Amen. Amen. All right. One more week of this series, and we'll wrap it up next week with part 4. We'd love to have you back for that. Before you take off, there is a Connect card inside of the program that you're handed on the way in, or if you've got the app downloaded on your phone, we would love to have you fill that out. If you're watching online, you can just scroll down a little bit and fill out that as well. It's our only way of tracking who has or hasn't been here, so please fill it out. If you're a guest with us, watching online or here in person, we'd love to know that you're here. We donate money to a different organization doing good things locally and globally for every first-time guest. Instead of giving you a gift card, we donate money in your name or in your honor to an organization doing good things locally and globally. For the month of July, it's Charity Water. Charity Water's been, we've been doing Charity Water since the beginning. July's always been the month because it's so hot, and it's very much a reminder, even as we're out there, that when we are thirsty, when we're dying of thirst, we have the ability to go to a faucet, turn something, and have access to clean drinking water in a moment, whereas much of the world does not have that access that we have. And so they're doing incredible work coming up with water solutions, whether it's drilling wells or biosand filters or whatever in various parts of the world. They've brought water to over, I don't even know what the number is lately, but millions of people. And so thanks for being here and spending your time with us so we can donate to them so that they can continue that incredible work. If you want more information, you can go to charitywater.org, or if you go to our Where Love page and click on their button there, you'll get more information about them. There's also a giving envelope. If Eastlake's home for you, this is your chance to help us out financially to continue to create a church. We don't typically like church, or a give button on the website. You can do that. Thank you in advance for all of you who give consistently and all of that to be able to make this happen. We could not do that, do this without you. 2 weekends ago, we did our first back alley event of the summer. It was a fun trivia night out here on a hot Friday night. We have got another one coming up on July 23rd. It's going to be a comedy night this time. We would love to have you plan your calendar accordingly. Come out for that. It's a great invite event. Or if you're watching online and haven't been to church because it's just been kind of scary for a while or whatever, this is a great outdoor event to be able to be a part of something like that. It's a free event. Come, hang out. I think it's, there's a food truck. I'm trying to remember the food truck. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but Monaco Bar is going to be there as well, and a lot of fun. So 8 o'clock that night, and then kids volunteers. You saw the mention in the video. We are always looking for kids volunteers. We understand that going into this fall, we are going to have some interesting decisions to make in terms of what we reopen and don't reopen, and strategically trying to figure out how do we maximize opportunity for people and can, as families return because schools and, summer travel's done. What does that mean in the rise of our kids areas? We would love for our decisions about what is best for our community not be limited by, well, we just don't have the volunteers to do that, right? We really do pride ourselves on being a sort of community that when you're here, we all pitch in to do something so that nobody has to do everything. And so if that's an area that you would love to, even if it's not kids, we recognize we'd love to put you to not work, but volunteer. We'd like to mobilize you to experience all of the things. We really do have a really small paid staff team. This church is run by volunteers, and so when we try and create really world-class volunteer experiences, we'd love to have you experience that for yourself. All right, I'm going to have you stand, and we're going to read a closing benediction for you, and then get you on your way to fireworks. Lord, embolden us to go wherever you call us, to greet whoever you send us, and to do whatever you ask of us, that we might know no fear except that reverence which leads to wisdom. Amen. May that go with you this week, whatever you're facing. Be safe out there tonight, guys. Don't burn anything down. Don't forget to pick up your kids. We've got snow cones in the lobby for your kids. Have a great week. See ya.